Diese Konferenz wird nun aufgezeichnet.
Now you are recorded and directly transmitted to wherever the American company GoToMeeting would like to have the video. Yeah, today's topic. One of the major topics I have in mind for today was the import and export operations. And Paolo is also asking for the question, can we receive the registration after? Sure, I will let the customers, our employees know that you want to have the registration. If you have already subscribed here on GoToMeeting, we will see already your email address. If you do not get the email, at least in the next 24 hours where the download can be found, simply go on YouTube, IBExpertise, also ISE at the end, behind IBExpert, and you will directly see the current videos. And they are there for downloading, they're free, so you are free to use them for your personal knowledge. Yeah, if you also need access to the sessions from last week's, you can also get them there. They are all there for downloading for free. And we will try to make the sessions as long as it makes sense for us, but as long as we have each time enough visitors, it's definitely a good way to make a training like that. Because we know that a lot of people might perhaps only get some good ideas about what I'm showing here, and sometimes a lot of people also do not even know what you can do with the database if you have not really done that before. Yeah, let's start with some very basic tasks. Let's try to have, for example, a set of data. We have our customer database, our demo database, and we have here some data inside the database, approximately 10,000 records, and we have the typical table structure. So that's not a big deal to have, for example, some informations here. And in IBExpert, when you go to the data tab of any table or of a view, or you go to the result tab of any SQL statement, you will always see this button here, the tool button, the export data tool button. And this is the easiest way to export data from the database into external formats. So we have here support for modern Excel files, Microsoft Word, RTF, HTML, text file, CSV file, diff file. Some file formats are perhaps not so much known any longer. For example, DBase or something like that is not so much often used in the current days because there are some better formats. But the most often used export format is, for example, TXT. And TXT text files is simply a CSV file format. And here's also the possibility here to direct select the CSV file format. Clipboard as text, in that moment you will have simply the data in the clipboard, and in CSV format you have the delimiter, and here you have separate options, for example, which one should be the separator, quoted strings, and so on. Formatting options are also possible, and whatever we do with that data, when we do now the, we may make here a new subdirectory, not to have all the files running anywhere. Get together GT, and when I go to that directory, cgt customer.csv is a very simple way to do so. We can open the file, export. After export, we can omit the column captions, we can export block things, and so on. So the easiest way is simply start now the export, and as you have seen, in approximately a second or half a second or so, we have now exported 10,000 records. What is also important to understand is in most export formats, we do not export the blob data. Some export formats offer the possibility to export blobs also. But text blobs, for text blobs, it can make sense. But if you have, for example, a carriage return line feed or something like that, and you want to export that into a CSV file, it could be a problem while importing that on a different platform. So now we have simply our CSV file, and we can see, for example, also other formats that were supported here, JSON formats and so on. That's one of the ways how we can do that. And yeah, that's the most easiest way to export data, simply using that by hand. But in a lot of situations, you need to have access to exported files or so much more often, and often also in batch mode, so you cannot always do that in a GUI version of IBExpert. But in the next step, I will also show you the very easy way to import data. When you go to Tools, Import Data, you can directly use our import data automatic wizard. We can say, okay, it should be in a new table. For example, I call the table cast, and I say drop table if exists. I think that is the source type of the formats that we are supporting. For example, in that case, we have here the text document, and text document is, for example, the possibility that we are now using the CSV file that we just exported to be imported again. And when I go here and I go here, and we see here directly the columns for the import operations. And the columns for the import operations give you the possibility here to see the first line with the caption, and you have here the possibility to set general options. For example, we want to start with the first row on line 2, and the field name row is line 1. So now we have the original field names that we have here all included already in our import. And we see already that the different columns seems to be very good detected. And we can say here, for example, trims string values and so on. And when you're doing the import, sometimes you have the problems that the CSV file is not a real defined format. So you do not have the 100% safety that this email column is, for example, not 200 or 300 characters long. It could be as long. So sometimes the automated import is a little bit more complex. But when you have made that successfully one time, we have in a lot of editors inside IBExpert the functionality not only to map the columns here to different types, because at the moment we are mapping these types to standard varchar 30, which is definitely not enough for a lot of these data. But what is perhaps even more interesting is the tab control here, which is called IBEBlock. IBEBlock simply is now in script format that allows us to create the table based on the setup that we have just made. And we can now, for example, do copy that. We go to cancel and we open a SQL text editor and we simply paste the full script here. And we will see a lot of IBEBlock scripts today. And that can be used to automate your operations. Automate your operations. For example, here we have the username, password, connection to the database. We open the database connection. We simply drop the original table. We have here the individual varchar columns, and we can here, for example, simply replace all these varchar columns from varchar 30 to varchar 150 or something like that. So it should be a little bit more space here inside, and varchar 31, for example, should also be varchar 150. And we have also here a varchar 32. Let's do it for all these types in a one-time operation here. So we have here simply a table cast, different columns which are automatically created. This is the mapping from the original file. This is the location of the imported file. And when we now do save all the data into a script, and we will do it here in the GT folder, for example, import CSV.SQL, we can now run the CSV, the IBEBlock script. We can run it here from inside IBExpert. So if we do that, we will see here that the operation is here currently at approximately 10,000 records. So it was imported successfully. So it was really a result that we had here expected. But we can, for example, also remove that information because a show message is always a modal dialog, and for batch operations, it's definitely not a good idea. But we can also do a IBEC progress, and IBEC progress is a simple message inside the IBEBlock scripting that can do a non-modal information to the end user. We save again the script, and we have a look, for example, at the table customer. And we see in the table customer all the data. So it worked perfectly fine. Let's do some drop on the table. So we remove the full table. And when we have such a message, object in use or something like that, just click on reconnect, and then you should be able to drop the table. The best thing is always to close it before you drop it. Otherwise, it will be still in use. That's my fault that I just made. And try to drop it again. And now it's gone. So let's have a look what we can do with that script. So if we start here, for example, the command prompt, and in the command prompt, we have the possibility to go to the same directory. And we see here, for example, the script file, the import CSV script file. And IBExpert has a built-in command line version. It's called IBEscript. And IBEscript is typically in the search path after the installation of IBExpert, or you always find it in the main directory of IBExpert. And the funny thing is really simple. I just have to call IBEscript, and I use the IBEBlock script file as a parameter here. And when I do that, the import can be done from a batch file. That's really a very interesting and easy way to import the data. It's a little bit slower than the import that we had interactively, but that has several reasons, but it's still fast enough for most of the jobs. And when we now go back here into the F5 refresh mode, we see again that the import was successfully done. So that's really a very easy way to import data from a CSV file or from any other source that you might have somewhere in your database or want to have in your database. I think that's a very easy way. So let's have a look again at the import data operations. We saw that we have different formats available. Text format we used already. One-time imports often are also really easy to use when you're working with Excel files or so. We will later have a connection to Excel files a little bit more in detail. So it's also really easy. Lotus Quattro Pro are not state-of-the-art formats. I do not know when you have seen the latest Lotus 1-3 worksheet. I think it could be at least 20 years old or so. But some might perhaps still use it. Paradox, DBase, so on. Microsoft Access is sometimes a helpful format to be imported, but all the other formats also can be used for importing that. But what is much more often a requirement and really helpful can be shown in the next step. Let's have a look at, for example, we are doing a simple LibreOffice, a calculation spreadsheet, and we say okay, and we simply make, for example, here a table and number and name, for example, and we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we say here, for example, dog, cat, mouse, elephant, parrot, or whatever. And the most interesting thing on that is simply when we are storing that file now, when we, for example, store that in a Excel format. So the good old XLS format, just we put it here also in the same directory, that we have a defined directory. And we simply say, okay, that should be animals.xls file. And we save that. And we say, yes, we want to have that format. We are doing now something that is really simple. We are marking here this area. And after selecting this area, we have here B2 to C4. And we can here now give that area a name. And that area name could be, for example, the animals. So anytime when we want to have now access to that data inside an Excel file, we can now directly say that is animals. So let's have a look at how we can work, for example, if you have multiple import or export jobs for Excel files, which is a typical business standard. We can now use something that is here in most systems built in, the so-called ODBC. And IBExpert is a 32-bit application, so we need a 32-bit data source. And we have now the possibility to have a user DSN, system DSN, file DSN, and so on. I will simply start with a user DSN, and I will have a look at the Excel file, depending on your company language or your preferred language. We can, for example, also use the Spanish version. That makes no big difference. But when we are using, for example, this one here, the Excel driver, we say finish and we say animals. For example, we give it a name and we simply open select workbook, and we want to have the workbook using that Excel file. And we have here several possibilities, for example, browse to scan and so on, but that depends on the Excel driver setup. And we simply say, okay, so when we now go in IBExpert and we want to import that data, for example, only one time, it is a really easy way to do so, simply by opening a tool that is built into IBExpert, which is called the ODBC viewer. And the ODBC viewer now opens all ODBC data sources that you have configured on that machine. And you can directly open here now the animals database with the animals table. And when you double click here, you see directly here number and the individual animals and the numbers and so on. And it's very often that you need that simply for a one-time import of data. That's really the simple way to do so. And the simple way to do so is now, again, here we have a export data. So we export from ODBC to your local file system again. Or we can simply say here, that's the right button, we export data into a script or export data into a table. So everything that we find here now inside the ODBC driver can now simply be connected to our Firebird database. So we are, for example, opening the current database. We say a new table should be created. We want to have originally exactly the same informations here. For example, we can here do some table mapping. For example, this one here should be a different data type, or this one should be a different data type. For example, this one, a varchar 80 should be enough for that. And this one is currently detected as a float. We can leave it as a float, but that's not the big problem. We can here, for example, have a look at the separate option. And when we say import or export, in that case, we have now done the job. So what does it mean? We have now a new table inside my database. And now we have here access to all the data that we have exported from any ODBC data source into our current database. So it's also for one-time operations, it's extremely easy to do so. And for more operations, when you want to do it from batch jobs, it's also really easy to do so. We will have a look at that example a little bit later. But you will definitely see that it can also be done really easy. Because when we are going to import some data or export some data, we have also other possibilities to automate that. We have seen that the import operation here was done more or less automatically, and we received a possibility to generate an import script based on the IBEBlock language. But we also have the possibilities to do it in different ways. So when we do that, like we simply have to write execute IBEBlock as begin end, and we have the different possibilities what we can do now. IBEBlock is a scripting language that is implemented in each IBExpert full version and also in the command line version. The command line version is the version that you have seen here, which we have executed for the import job. That is IBExpert command line version. So you see IBExpert.exe, and you also have the possibility, if you like that, on any licensed machine, you can also use IBExpert IBE script as an exe file for batch operations and so on. But you can also do the work with IBEscript.dll. IBEscript.dll is almost the same functionality that we have also in the scripting environment, but you can integrate that in your own application. You can distribute that, and on every licensed IBExpert licensed computer, you can use that. We also have the possibility to sell you a so-called OEM version, which allows you on a specific setup to integrate IBEscript.exe or IBEscript.dll completely with your product and distribute that with your product unlimited. Depends a little bit on the size of your company, how much we charge for that. If you are interested in that, just contact sales@IBExpert.biz or contact@IBExpert.com for USA and Canada and South America to get a quote from us. But that's one of the very easy ways to do, for example, things that might be a little bit more complex than you have already done the jobs inside your own application. One of the things that we can also do is, let's have a look at the database itself. When we want to export, for example, the full database with anything, including the metadata or the data or whatever, we can use tools, extract metadata, and even that it's called extract metadata, it is not only metadata. So when we want to have a dump script of all the data inside the current database, it's really easy. We can here say, for example, now we want to have it in a single file. We want to have it in a clipboard. We want to have it in script executive, in VCS files, or in separate files. Separate files simply is the, from my perspective, preferred choice. Let's go to GT, EXP, and we simply say we want to have all objects, all metadata objects should be exported, and also all data should be exported. And when we have here, for example, selected the table animal, the table category, the table cast, and so on, you can also do here a where clause. So if you want to export, for example, the data in a SQL script with everything that is inside your database, including blobs, for example, you can have here, for example, a where clause. If, for example, you as a software manufacturer also want to create a empty demo database automatically, it can be done on that way really easy. And you have here separate options. Do you want to generate a database create statement, or do you want to have a connect statement? Should username and password be included in the script, or you can also run it in IBEscript.exe with parameters for username and password. Limit the file size to a specific maximum size. So if you start to have a 5 terabyte size text file, it could be a problem to open that with a specific editor. A lot of other options, and also here in the lower area you see, for example, also extract blobs. We have some script extensions like reinsert. Reinsert is more or less makes the script a little bit smaller. Reinsert simply means we are doing the same insert again with the same columns again, but we only give the values. You will see that when I activate that. Use active update or insert if we need that, but it's for a maximum speed export not really needed. Extract privileges for selected objects and DDL privileges if they are really needed. And what we do here now is again the same possibility. As you can see here, we have, for example, again a new IBEBlock script, and the IBEBlock script is, for example, here now simply I call it a ex.sql, and what we can do with that is IBEscript ex, and now it will export all the data from the database together with all the information that we have selected here. And when we have a look here at this folder, we see all the data and all the scripts that were created. The interesting thing is, for example, if you go here inside such a script file, you have always the possibility here directly to use the insert statements with or without the reinsert possibilities. If you needed to export your database to a different database system, because most of the insert, update, delete statements can be used also in other platforms. But you can also do the following. If you, for example, open the runmeall.sql, you see the order in which all the operations of the database are done. You see, for example, we are starting with IBE start, then we are going through each individual tables, and at the end we are going to IBE $finish. What does that mean? What we are creating here in that export is a dump of the database. IBE start will have the create database operations and the basic objects that we are needing for accessing the data. For example, putting the data into a different tables. Therefore, we need the table definitions and so on. But after the tables are created, only a view is also created, but nothing else is created then. Then we have the, as you have seen here, for example, the individual insert statements, and then you go to commit work. And then we have the IBE $finish, and the IBE $finish will now create the primary keys, foreign keys, indices, triggers, and so on. And at the end, stored procedures and everything else, the privileges for all the objects are also created automatically. The interesting thing is when you export your full database into such a dump file, it is really easy, for example, to make global changes in your database. A lot of customers have problems because they started their application based on character set none. For all US customers, it's typically, when I talk to US customers about character sets, they typically say, okay, we have 26 characters. We do not have a character set problem. It's a problem of the rest of the world, but not from the American. But already in South America with Spanish or Portuguese language, you have already special characters. And when you want to convert a database from not using a character set to properly using a character set, it is a really easy way, because you can export the data into a script, replace here in the script all character set by the favorite character set that you need in that moment. And you can run at the end, for example, this batch file. And this batch file now will give you the options to run everything again and create a new database from that. And this will now, for example, in that case, use the existing new character set. We're also doing a lot of character set conversions to UTF-8 and so on. And UTF-8 conversions are sometimes not so easy to handle if you have not proper data already in your database. But on that way, it's an extremely easy way to do so. That's the export of the full database, and import from the full database into a new database. Simply run the run me all script, and then you have a new database created with exactly the same data, exactly the same structures. And that's also one of the background information that we have for when you have problems with your database. For example, a specific table makes problems for whatever reasons. Sometimes it's already easy enough to export the full metadata and data from tools, extract metadata, and only remove the tables which are making problems from the extract metadata. And that's a really easy way to do that. For example, to repair a database. A more complex way to repair databases is tools database inside. With tools database inside, you can also open databases which cannot still be opened in Firebird. It's a much more powerful environment, but I will talk that in a session definitely later, because it takes some time to make you understanding that. Okay, let's do some other import export operations. You know the insert command, and you know perhaps also the insertx command. Perhaps you read that already somewhere. Insertx, anytime you are writing some command here inside any SQL statement, SQL editor inside IBExpert, you have always the possibility, when you are with the cursor on that keyword, to simply press F1, and you will get directly to the website where you get the information, what is really behind that. Insertx is a very simple command, for example, to have a one-liner to import data from a CSV file, and to have the import that we have done here for the more or less complex GUI operations a little bit more faster with a one-liner, which is really simple to do so. Export is also a script command that we have implemented, and export is also very fast to do. Export as into, when you have the information here, for example, you have different formats. For example, XML format, text, CSV, div, zip, and so on format, HTML format, and so on. And when we say, for example, export as, let's go back to the example, export as into, let's go, for example, here for a, I do not want to download that again and again and again. And we want to download, for example, some data into a HTML file. And let's, for example, do that here in that way. But we do not want to have that here from RDB $fields. We want to have it on customer. And we say here, see, done GT customer.html and color options and so on. And when I run that, I simply press F9, and we have now here the customer, let's see, CSV file. This one is the HTML file. We have to open that with Brave, for example, as a browser, and that is the result. So if you need, for example, a very simple one-time export of data to an HTML file, it's extremely easy to do so. And depending on whatever you want to do with that, you can, for example, also export a HTML file as a result from a stored procedure or whatever you have in mind. And you can upload that using different possibilities. For example, to a local drive, or what we can do, for example, a little bit later after that was exported, we have also some other functionalities that you can use inside such a script. Anytime when you are starting a script with this execute IBEBlock here on top, you have the possibility to use all the operations that you might already know from any stored procedure or trigger programming. But we have a lot of extensions in that. And when you press here, for example, control space, you see the possible operations which are here available. And a lot of these possible operations will be discussed a little bit later here today. But I will show you here, for example, currently a very simple way. For example, when you press here FTP, you have the possibility to create a FTP session, upload data from an FTP server, for example, your web server. So you can, for example, create a HTML file from your local data, upload that to your web server automatically every night, every hour, or whenever you want. Very easy way. Or another option is, for example, the SMTP send mail. SMTP send mail is a very easy way to do a send mail operation. And SMTP send mail, simply click that, press F1, and you see directly a full explanation what is supported, TLS, SSL, and so on. Everything is supported here. And the simple operation here is really easy to understand. So you simply have to use several parameters: username, password, server name, CC, BCC, subject, message text, and attachments, for example. So you can directly use that for sending emails based on error messages or based on a daily done backup or whatever you want to do that. You just need to have a connection to a SMTP server. And you can also use here, as you can see, for example, Gmail or whatever kind of SMTP server you have in mind. That's also possible. And so it makes also one of the ways to have your automated your automated communication together with other applications a little bit more flexible. Send mail is one of the things that is always helpful. Receiving mails, IBEC, POP3, IBEC, POP3 Connect, example of work with SMTP POP3 servers. What we also have in our full set of application is really simple. You can, for example, connect to a POP3 server, download the emails from that account directly into a EML format. I think most of you might who already worked with email operations, sending, receiving, and so on. The EML format is really the standard format. You can directly open a EML format, for example, in Thunderbird with a double click, and you see content of the mail and also attachments and so on. And what we have here now is really simple. We connect to the POP3 server. We get the different properties, for example, IDs and so on. And what is really interesting, after we have, for example, stored the save to file, IBC save to file, the data that is here coming, we have also the possibility not only to save the file somewhere in the file system, But also we have some other functionalities. They are starting with IBEC-Mime. And IBEC-Mime, for example, is a very interesting way, for example, to have a example here. Let's have a look at get attachment file name, for example. And here we have a fully functional IMAP example. So if you have, for example, an IMAP account or a POP3 account that's technically exactly the same, we can directly connect to that IMAP account also. IMAP is more or less a server-saved email format, and POP3 is a client-based saved email format. But the very interesting thing is here, when you have a look here at these operations, for example, IBEC-Mime get attachment count. If you receive, for example, emails from customers with orders or order forms or attached PDF files or whatever, you can directly use such a function to connect to your email server, put the data that you have received directly, for example, into your Firebird database, extract all the attachments from that Firebird database, from that email, and put these individual files also into your database in block files, because you have here the save to file, load from file, and so on. You have all the possibilities to operate that. And you can do, for example, a lot of logic here inside. For example, if there is an attachment like .pdf or something like that, in that case, we will do some other operations that we will have a look at that later. And this will, for example, give you a very simple way also to extract the text mode or the HTML mode of the text that is attached to a email account. And if you want to automate, for example, email operations, it's a very, very easy way. And as you can see here, it's approximately 30 lines of code. So it's not really a job that you have to learn years and years of environments. It's really easy to understand when you have done that already inside such a database. And like here in the execute block, for example, you can, for example, export data, send it by SMTP or FTP or whatever, and so on. But let's do some operations a little bit more easy. Simply create a table. We call it .dat file or something like that. ID big int not null primary key. And for example, a fn like a file name, varchar 255. And for example, that is the content of the file itself. Let's call it a blob, and you might more often use a blob, for example, for subtype text, which is the typical text mode blob for RTF or memo fields or something like that. But we are using a blob without a subtype. And what we do now is really simple. We open the .dat file, we create a new record, for example, 1, and we say test.pdf or something like that. Should be the time to write it correctly. And when we commit that, we can, for example, here simply say, okay, that's the data that we need. And we can, for example, here open the file. And I have, for example, here a program files, Firebird, doc. And we have here, for example, in the doc directory, not the txt file, but we want to have the PDF files. Let's have a look at asterisk.pdf. And we, for example, say, we open the release notes. I take both of the files for later use to a different directory, but you will see that a little bit later. So now we have the original source of the PDF file here inside our IBExpert block file. We save that, and in the attached table, we also commit the operation. So now the data is really inside my database, here inside that column. And what is really interesting, in hex mode, you can have a look at all the content of the PDF file. But it could be that we have to click on that column to see it really. So now we see here directly the original source code of the PDF file. But what is even more interesting is a very small utility that we are using as PDF. And as PDF, what we are technically here using internally, you've seen that even that is 250 pages PDF file. It was starting extremely fast. And what we are using is really simple. I will copy the PDF files to a defined directory so that we have the quick start guide, this one, and we copy that and we put it here into our directory, and I call it one. No, this one will be 1.pdf and the second one will be 2.pdf to have a very simple naming operations. And you have a lot of possibilities nowadays to open PDF files. For example, simply by a double click on my machine, and now opens the Brave browser to display that. But if you want to have a very small footprint PDF viewer, I can recommend to use the same thing that we are using, which is called Sumatra PDF. And Sumatra PDF is an executable which is really extremely fast and extremely powerful also to display PDF files inside your application without all the bullshit from Adobe PDF Reader when you have started the PDF Reader and it takes 10 to 20 seconds until you see the first time the PDF. That's really not comfortable. Sumatra PDF, let's go back here, for example, and say right click, open with, and we want to say we want to have a different application for that. We want to have the PDF from Sumatra PDF for that, and we want to have that opened automatically anytime. If you want to integrate that inside your application, it's extremely easy. What we did here, for example, is really we are starting the Sumatra PDF.exe, and we simply say there's a handle that we can send to the executable, that the executable should not create its own window, it should use a window on your application. So it's a really fast and easy way. And also displaying the data or printing PDF files and everything else that you typically need in daily operations is really easy done in that way. So that is also the possibility inside a database. The biggest databases that we are currently working with is on a customer machine, approximately 2 terabytes of PDF files. It's a patent lawyers database, I think. And they have all patents from the last 130, 40 years or so inside their database. And that is really a lot of data. But also in daily business, we have terabytes of data. It's really not a big case nowadays. We will perhaps later talk about that possibilities in, I think, approximately 2 weeks, perhaps about that topic. How to make the databases not too big, but that we will be important a little bit later. Okay, we imported the data into our PDF file more or less manually. And if you want to import, for example, now 1,000 records, it's definitely not a good idea to do it in that way. Let me show you how to import files from a file system into your database more or less automatically. So we have here the .dat file table, and we have the possibility, for example, here to do the following. We want to have, again, a script file so that the import should be done automatically. We simply drag and drop the object here from the Database Explorer here directly to the SQL text editor. We say here, create connection. We have almost a fully usable script here already. And we have here several preset options. We can here, for example, say that is the standard that we want to have. We can use the try finally operations here. We say here, use DB. And what we simply want to do is now extremely simple. We want to have a file system data view of files that are in that file systems available. So for example, the PDF file 1.pdf, 2.pdf, and we can make a copy of 2.pdf to a 3.pdf just for having a little bit more data inside our path. We can use, for example, for importing multiple files, IBEC get files. IBEC get files. You might know from if your Pascal developers might know already the get files command, which is really easy to find files in a specific directory. IBEC get files, press F1, and you see how it works. And here is, for example, a very simple example how to import data into your database. And we want to have now here only that part together with that comment. That's nice. And we want to have that copied here. And let's have a look at, we are not searching for script files, we are searching for PDF files. And we want to have a look at drive C, at the GT folder. And we want to have PDF files. And we want to have recursive and full name. If he has found at least one record, he will have a look at that record and get the file name. And the file size is not interested. We just want to have the basic operations. Here, adding PDF file, for example. Adding PDF file, insert into scripts, and so on. We could, for example, now do that in that way, but the good old lazy way, we want to have that in our .dat file. And in our .dat file, really simple, drag and drop, and place the insert here, and you see here the original SQL statement predefined. And we want to have, for example, every parameter that is called here file name should be renamed to FN, because I really like short names. And file list, for example, should be called FL. So then we have the file count, CNT, something. Really just to make the script a little bit shorter here. And we want to have here, for example, the FN. We want to have the DAT, and the DAT is the one that the script data is here created. Script data is loaded from the file name from the file list at the position E. We are adding that, and we are inserting that into the DAT file, and we simply say E equals E plus 1. The first operation that we do is delete from DAT file commit. And then we are doing the operations here by hand. And the ID is, for example, here the variable E. We are simply taking the variable E exactly in the same way. We are pressing, putting the semicolon behind that. We are doing that. And at the end, we are doing the commit only at the end. So let's have a look at what happens when we start that. I started that, and when we have a look at the .dat file and commit to see the current data, we now see that all data were completely imported together with the full name of the file. And when we double click that, we can see, for example, the first PDF file, the second PDF file, and the third, which is the second PDF file again. And as you have seen, it runs extremely fast again. Let's go back and import files here. And let's go back here to drop all data again, empty table, close that. And we go back to command prompt, IBEscript, import files. So very fast imported. Importing three PDF files took approximately 156 milliseconds. It's extremely fast to do that, including searching for the files and so on. And they are really inside the database now. And you can have a look again at the database itself and pre-process, for example, the data. We have, for example, several utilities. We will talk about that in a different session when we are doing a little bit more the possible operations. For example, create a thumbnail image from a PDF file, create a thumbnail picture from a email file, for example, or extract text from PDF files, extract text from email files, and so on. And perhaps if we can help you on projects where you want to use that, it is an option to have a built-in email functionality inside your application without all the dangerous stuff that is possible by implemented email operations. Because when you, for example, have a fully functional email client inside your application, it's often a little bit more dangerous. And in most cases, most of the end users really need only a functionality to read emails and to send emails, and not all this fancy stuff that is possible with Outlook or with Thunderbird. So it really depends on where you are working from. So that is the import of the data. So extremely simple. Even more simple is the export of data. Let's have a look and do a new script. And what we can do here now is really simple. Let's go back to, for example, that file, drag and drop the table here to that editor. And we simply say for select into these files, do begin end. And what we do is extremely simple. We have a new directory, not to overwrite the original files. .dat files, for example. And since we have the original file name here together with the original path, we can do, for example, fn equals IBEC extract file name, for example. That's one of the operations that you can have already in mind, that you can also use from Delphi or Lazarus applications. We just want to have the file name, not the file path, from the original fn. And we want to say IBEC save to file. And the file name should be now the constant that I still have here in my mind, and the fn behind that. And the second parameter is a value. That is the DAT, because in the select operations we were putting the data stream into the DAT variable, and the mod is STF override, for example. What is now also possible when we have, for example, this one here a little bit easier to have the FN directly here inside. We can, for example, say FN equals that. Always possible to make any code a little bit looking more nice. But what I want to have here now is really the FN to show you some more possibilities. IBEC set file attributes and file date time, for example. If you have a database and you want to have, for example, a file system that is connected to a database, and you want to put some files to a specific database block files, but you want to recreate the original file again with the original timestamp, you can set the file date time based on a different column that you have perhaps stored also inside your database, because there's also, as you can imagine, a function that is called IBEC file date time and file attribute, and also file size, for example. It's also a possibility to know already how large a file is, to order by a specific size or whatever you want to do with that. And file date time gives you the information on a specific file name to have the file date time read, or set file date time is in that case the possibility to rewrite the original timestamp to that file again. We are often using that also for distributing executables, because in most of our applications we simply upload new compiled executables to a specific database, and the program loader is connecting to that database, checking out if the current file that is currently already on the local file system has the same size and the same timestamp as the one in the database. And if it's different, it downloads the file from the database, puts it into the local drive, and sets the file date time from the database to the file, and will work on that database, on that executable. And that's really an easy way, for example, also to distribute some files among your customers. If you are working with dozens or hundreds or thousands of customers on different locations, it's not so easy to have a automated setup often. We typically only distribute a program starter, and the program starter is in that case responsible for downloading the most current executable file that we want to have in use for that. Yeah, easy script. Started with F9. Let's have a look at the new path, and we see the original files. And as you've seen, and as most FTP servers also do that, if you do not mention that differently, they get the current timestamp and not the timestamp that they had when they were started, when they imported into the database, because that's one of the reasons where the developer or the user of the database, or the script developer here, is now responsible for. But I think it's a really easy way to understand what is possible with that. The session that we plan in approximately 2 weeks will also have some handling for when you are scanning documents. We are trying to make at least of the scanner technology to be used inside our applications. We typically let the scanner scan the documents, and when we, for example, have the documents in PNG or JPEG format scanned, uploaded on an FTP server or on whatever position on, we typically using Tesseract OCR software. Tesseract OCR software allows you to, for example, simply use a command line to do that, and a command line, for example, can be executed IBEC exec. You can use any command line here, for example, with IBEC exec, and that's also one of the possibilities. Interesting question from Kevin. How do you update your metadata on your customer servers? Yes, a very good question, because we distribute not only executables, but also SQL script files. So if you, for example, have a SQL script somewhere that should be done inside to detect differences of databases, I will do here a clone registration info. I will do, for example, here a DB2, and I will do a copy of DB1 to DB2 to make it as fast as possible. And DB2 is at the moment still exactly the same, but when we have now, for example, a different, some very small changes, but it's sometimes really hard to find only these small changes, whatever we're responsible for. To understand your own changes, one of the things also a lot of IBExpert customers do not know, press at least one time on version history. When you click on version history and you say, okay, some objects are internally created, and when we now go back, for example, and reconnect to that database, and we say, for example, we want to have here some more comments inside that test 1, 2, 3, some more comment. So we compile that again, and we remove one of the lines and one of the lines, and we start that again. And when you now go to version history, you see here directly the different versions of the object that you're currently working on. And you can also here see, for example, what have changed. So if we have now here, for example, comparison between the prior version and the next version, that is not the best one. We should have a comparison. No. This one here, for example. Now you see here what I've just changed. So that's also really easy. But let's have a look at what is, for example, the database comparer. The database comparer would be, in that case, for example, for Kevin's question, DB1 is a reference. That is a new database. The DB2 is, for example, the customer database. And we can execute that more or less automatically. And this one is a script that needs to be executed on database 2, so that database 2 should have exactly the same metadata as database 1 will have. So that's really a simple way to do so. Even more interesting would be when you have a look again at the IBEBlock. At the IBEBlock, you can, for example, create a comparison simply by this lines of code. And the result here, for example, that can be, for example, also uploaded into a database, will be downloaded from your customer whenever he will have a new update to be executed. And it will be executed, for example, by IBEscript by IBEscript.dll, and will then, in that moment, be used for that. Backup resource not really needed, must not be a dedicated server. Kevin is asking for that has to be a dedicated server. We are using a specific server on a specific IP address in our network at a data center where we have different servers, and the executable, the program starter executable, that is simply connecting to that server and knows, for example, the current customer's executable and the current customer's database that we have. And when it finds a update script or a new executable, it will download that. It will try to execute that automatically with a warning to the end user if it's really master update, but in most cases, most of these operations can be done automatically. So almost all the operations, the changes in metadata can be done while the customers are still working on that. So backup restore is recommended after really heavy changes, but not really needed. So it can be avoided to have a backup restore required for that. It can still be used without any problem because the script that IBExpert creates that you have just seen here from tools database comparer is also really easy to be used in a real-time environment based on existing systems. One of the things that you might have seen already in the past on when you want to change metadata on databases while people are working on that, one of the hints that I always give to people, go to transactions in IBExpert, go to, for example, recommitted on both sides, and the metadata transaction properties is extremely important, and simply change no wait to wait. When you know the object in use error message, you know already what I'm talking about. The object in use error message will be executed, will be a problem in most classic or super classic versions of Firebird, typically in 2.5, but in Firebird 3 you will also get it in the super server version sometimes. And when you're going here to the metadata wait mode, in that case you will no longer have it as often as before. Just a hint for the future, and also easier to update existing databases. We have a very big customer project with the 200 restaurants in Germany, and one of the good messages here from Germany already, where we currently are, is already that next week the restaurants will reopen again, only on 50% of the capacity, and only in Lower Saxony here in northern Germany they will start to do so. But it's a good point to get back any source of beer again, and not only drink at home. That's no replacement for that. And especially also since the weather gets now a little bit more comfortable, it's a very good thing, I think. And let's hope that this fucking virus will stay at home or wherever it is, and not make that a bad decision for the government. But we hope that especially in Germany, the people will react in a proper way and not be in trouble with that. Yeah, let's go back. We had some scripts, export the scripts, and for example, exporting that file, exporting a PNG file, exporting a JPEG file, run with Tesseract OCR. It's a free OCR engine. You can directly download that, and it runs in command line mode. It's really powerful, several platforms, and it's also in use, for example, by Google Books, and also the development and the quality of Tesseract is impressively good. And if you need some help from us, for example, also how to implement that, stay tuned, or simply we'll go back to the hotline support that we also offer to you. We can also implement such a system for you much easier, because we made that already several times. So that's one of the things, how to work on that. Perhaps you know from a lot of printer manufacturer, multifunctional printer, scanner manufacturers, a lot of them offer integrated solutions for that. To control them is almost impossible, because they have all different technologies. From the good old guys that we are sometimes here, I'm 53 years old, and I know from times when the scanner was controlled with a Twain interface, and at that time you were able to program that. But nowadays there is no classic interface any longer for any of these scanner technologies. Some of them still work, but most of them are only partly working. But if you, for example, have a IP address of an FTP upload or something like that, and everything on the FTP, for example, on the other end of the FTP server is executed by a script that is executed, getting the files, uploading the files to the database, putting the text file into the database, running OCR over the database file, creating thumbnails from the files, and so on. In that case, you have a really easy way to implement also for different hardware, because whatever your customer asks yourself, what kind of hardware should I buy? You can typically say any that is available on the market, because I'm not interested in the basic technology. I'm just interested in that this scanner is capable to upload a file, for example, to FTP or to any other file system that is available. We were here connected to a database, a Firebird database. And the funny thing is, this command here, the IBEC create connection command, is not only capable to do what we still have here as a default CT interface. It's no difference to CT Firebird, but what is extremely interesting is CT ODBC. CT ODBC, when we go to IBEC create connection, press F1, and when we have a look at the ODBC access, let's have a look at what is here implemented. And let's have a look here. We will copy that. And here are some explanations about ODBC connectionstrings.com. So just have a look at connectionstrings.com to see how you can create, for example, connection strings on runtime. It's extremely powerful what is possible. And when you need really strange stuff, one of the things that we also have in mind, let's have a look at cdata.com. Perhaps some of you know that. cdata.com has a very powerful product, which is a ODBC driver, this one here. And this ODBC driver has approximately 190 whatever ODBC connections included. And for all these platforms, when you want to have, for example, a connect to Amazon Marketplace, when you want to connect, for example, to PayPal or Box.com, the file system distribution, whatever stuff, Google Ad Manager, CSV files, for example, also Amazon DynamoDB, whatever, Excel Online, and so on. The interesting thing is the product from CData is licensed by installation. And the installation is, I think the license price is per installation approximately $600 per year. And the drivers will stop after 1 year, so you have to update them. But when you, for example, have a look at the basic idea, for example, also to all the possibilities that are available here, for example, UPS upload or YouTube uploads when you like that, have automated Twitter accounts or reads on Twitter, and but mostly, for example, also Google Mail, for example, was included, Gmail and other mail, Google Calendar, and so on. You can directly use that to connect to, for example, Google Calendar, and you can do an insert on a specific table, and in that moment you are directly connected to your calendar, and your calendar will in that moment have that content, or you can do a select on that. It's really a powerful product. It's a little bit expensive on the long run when you are using that on multiple servers, but we are using that for customers on one server. For that customer, he paid for that product on one server, and we are downloading and uploading everything into a Firebird database, and from that Firebird database we are using that ODBC driver to put the data then into the platform where we need that. So it must not be any client that is connected to that ODBC drives. But if they, for example, get some data from PayPal or something like that, we simply have a script running there, and such a script is completely implemented using that technology here. We are simply connecting to that ODBC driver. We are simply saying, let's go back to that example. We are simply going to a specific ODBC driver. We are selecting the current PayPal payments, for example, transactions table, and there are some tables how they manage that. And we can simply put the data from PayPal directly into a Firebird database. And the next step, we are working on the Firebird database again to put the data directly into the order entry system and so on, to see directly without any manual operation where the data comes from. That's also one of the possibilities. Let's have a look at the original script. Let's have a look at what is really important here. We do not want to have returns. We want to have, for example, the begin. This one is not really needed. We want to have an ODBC connection. And let's remember, we had a animals ODBC connection. DSN equals animals. That's it. We open the connections and we say, for example, for select number name from animals into name to IBC show message name. Simply make it a little bit easier. Dog, cat, mouse, elephant, parrot. So we have approximately options, editor options, display 9 numbers, 13 lines of code that is needed to have almost any connection from any script inside IBEBlock to a specific ODBC connection to automate import, to automate export, and so on. And all of these platforms I was showing to you, including the C data platforms or the Excel ODBC drivers and so on, they are not the fastest possibilities that exist on the market, but they are definitely very good ways to import or export data from your database or to your database. When we talk about speed, the fastest way to get data into a Firebird database or outside your Firebird database is a very different way. Let's go to the Firebird configuration first to have that prepared for this. So let's go to the Firebird config file, and I will put it here into my documents folder to be able to edit that. So try this, blah, 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 and yes, yes. So external files. I was talking about that already in a session 2 weeks ago, I think. External file access equals, for example, full. And we save that. And important, copy it back to your Firebird path. Some Firebird versions are extremely problematic if they do not find a Firebird config file. I think 5.257 or so was still a problem. You get really stupid error messages when you want to connect to such a database server that is not really finding its Firebird config file. But what we have to do also is, when we have changed this value for the import or for the external file access, we have to restart the service. That's important, otherwise it will not do that. Stop that and start that again. And now we can do the following. Let's go to, for example, our good old customer table. Our customer table, we will not using the customer table, we are using the product table because it has a few less columns. It makes my job a little bit easier. We have here different columns for the product table, and when we go to the DDL page, we have here a definition which are the columns of that table. Let's go to a script editor, and I say ext, and I simply say numeric 18, numeric should be replaced by char. So let's have a look, and everything here that was a char or is now a char and a char should now be simply char columns. For external files, you should not have all these restrictions because most restrictions will not work for that. So simply ignore these restrictions. And this one is, for example, a char 1. And what is the very easy way how to define such a table is create table, table name, external file, and then we say, where is the file? CGT product dot or whatever. You can name it in any way that you want. And when we execute that and we commit that, and we now say insert into product ext, select from product. It took approximately 16 milliseconds to export the data into that file. And when we have a look at that file, the product dot, and we have a, for example, notepad or something like that on this, it shows already all our data, but it's not really easy readable at the moment. So it's not the best way to do that in that current implementation. Let's try to think about that again. So we go back here to the product ext and we say drop table. And we say, okay, we need something that is more or less a character return line feed. Okay, let's make a new column, CRLF. And the column CRLF is, for example, the char 2. Character return line feed, for all the people who know that binary. In Windows world, we have 2 characters for that. In Linux world, we have only 1 character for that, but that's not really the problem. Let's create the table based on that definition again. And then go back to the insert statement. And now we are doing the following. We do we take all the columns and we take one more column, which is simply the character return line feed. And when we now start that again, F9, 30 milliseconds, was a little bit slower, but not really slow. And when we now go back to that file, we should see the following. At the top of that file, we still have the original data. When we go to the end, it looks a little bit easier and better. That is because the insert into was doing only inserts at the end of the file. The file was still there. So what I do now, I deleted the file and I do the insert into again and commit again. And when we now go to the file, that is currently now the look and feel of that file. For example, you see here directly the so-called fixed format, it's called. We have 18 characters for the first column, 18 characters for the second column, 50 characters for the third column, 50 characters for that column, then I think 12 for this one and 1 for this one. So you have a very easy to creatable format, because it's a as called fixed format. And sometimes when you have a lot of data to be imported, at the moment we are talking about 10,000 records which were imported in less than a tenth of a second, so in 20 milliseconds or so. When you need to import a lot of data or export a lot of data from your database extremely fast, in most cases, it's the best way to work with external files. And external files, for example, can be used directly here inside your database. We are now working on that file name. So we do not have a internal data pages inside our table for that. It is completely stored outside the table. One of the restrictions that we have, we can do a select on that table, and we can do inserts. Insert simply means it puts some new records at the end. But what we cannot do updates. We get an error message. And we also cannot do a delete in that file. Delete simply means you have to do a different way of doing a delete. And the easiest way to delete the records of that file is drop the original file. So anytime when we now go back to the data, here we see no data. And we can, for example, do some inserts, and we can now do that again and again and again. Some other restrictions which are really important. It is not really required to have the product ext table in that case, for example, with the character columns only. But the most important reason why I always use a char column for that is really simple. When you are using, for example, numeric or integer or whatever kind of columns, you will see the binary information there. And the binary information is always hard to create from external files or to be read from external files. And if you're doing some importing, exporting, and a really large amount, for example, price lists for manufacturers or something like that, it's a very nice way to do that. And to have that in mind, if that is, for example, a version of the file that you currently do not directly support, just have in mind, for example, if you, for example, get a really large CSV file from somebody that you have to import, it is often really easy to write a very small piece of application that opens, for example, the this file and replaces the delimiters by fixed numbers of characters, spaces. And if we have here, for example, the edit control, when we, for example, here have the semicolon replaced by a specific number of spaces between, it is really easy to write a very fast, simple command line tool to make a conversion from a CSV format into that fixed format, and then put the fixed format somewhere into the file system of the database server. That must be somewhere locally in the file system of the database server. That's important. And then simply do a create table command, and the create table command together with the external file command will directly connect that table to that file. And then you can do a select into insert into internal table, select stuff from external table, for example. That's really by far the fastest way. It's definitely no problem to import or export more than 50 to 200,000 records per second using that way, also for more complex tables. If your database server, your Firebird server is not extremely slow. And it's really one of the ways when you're really working with large amount of data, don't try to import this large amount of data using a client-based operation. Client-based operation, when you're doing individual insert statements, in most cases, you will already be at a limit of perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 inserts per second, which might be already the limit on a very fast network on fast computers. And in reality, when you are doing software creation for customers, it is in that case often extremely a problem when you, for example, need the whole night for importing the data, and the night will typically not getting longer. You cannot talk to your customers and say, okay, that can only be done on the weekend because I need several hours for that. And we also know that, for example, when you're doing importing, exporting data from one database to another database, it's also a very, very fast and powerful way to do so. So just have that in mind. It's also a very good way to import and export the data from your database. Yeah. Let's have a look at some other functionalities. I was talking about the possibility, for example, to do the IBEC SMTP send mail functionality. And if you, for example, need to send somebody an email, it's sometimes also nice to have, for example, a nice looking version of the email attachment. And for example, one of the ways how to do that also automatically from batches is also really simple. Go to Tools, Report Manager. And Report Manager could, for example, be done here when you right-click on that current database, New Report. It will again do some new tables inside the report, inside the database. And we do a test report. And we, for example, now do the following. We do a extremely simple example. You can also do this fast report, a little bit old version, but still a good usable version. But I just want to demonstrate you how to do some of the script-based operations based on that. Get together or something like that. And we can do some nice looking, different, for example, character size 200, whatever, 60, and bold, and so on. We store that, and when we create that, we see that as a result. And we just want to have here a specific content of the database itself. What is technically done inside the database is extremely simple. It is creating a new IBE pseudo system table, exactly like the version history table, which is used for the stored procedure source codes and so on. And we have here the source code and the name of the specific reports. And when you have a look at the IBE report source, it will give you the possibility here also to understand in XML format what is technically stored inside the report. So for example, here we see the text get together, for example. How to automate now access to create, for example, a exported invoice automatically, send it by email automatically, make whatever you want automatically. It must not be done by IBExpert, but I show you a way how to do that. Let's go back again to the IBEBlock scripting. Let's do a use db command to open the database, select IBE reports source from IBE report, where IBE reports.id equals 1 into src. And now we are starting a IBEC create report function based on the src that we just created. And we say params is empty, not needed, and specific options are also not needed. And we say res equals that. And then we say, I will to press F1 here to have the source code to be copied from the original stuff. Here's, for example, the original part. Then we say export report. And now we have, again, several formats that you can use for the thing to be exported. And we simply take this one here, this line, and we put it here into raise equals export report. Let's do it here, also call it in the same way, report equals, and we want to have it stored on CGT wrap test and PDF format, embedded fonts too, and so on. And let's do that. I started that. I space create PDF, for example. And let's have a look at the wrap test PDF file. Open with Sumatra PDF get together. So you have almost anything that is possible inside the report manager. For example, very basic functionalities. Right click here on go to design report, and you have, for example, also the possibilities here to add other objects, for example, barcode object or something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. In the current implementation, we do not have QR codes and 2D barcodes, but perhaps we will add that in the future, in a future version. But in most cases, when we need QR barcodes, we are using a add-on that will create the QR barcode content automatically already and put it into a image file, and the image file is part of the system here. And I simply start now the new report design with, for example, here the barcode at that position. And when we do that, and when we stop that, and when we go back here to the script file and we restart that again, and we reopen the wrap test, we see here now the new version together with barcode, and whatever we have changed, for example, is now directly part of the new format. And that can be, for example, used to have a kind of a user-defined template. If, for example, your application allows, for example, some basic operations inside your database, but your end user, your customer, wants to have some additional features, make his own reporting, and your application is perhaps not prepared for that, but you have given him access to the Firebird database. It could be a very interesting way to do so. In that way, we also have some other functionalities here that is also not known by all the people that we know. For example, orders. When we go here now to orders, and we have here, for example, a net amount and a date also. When you click here on this button, data analysis, you typically get a later a small error message, but we will talk to that a little bit later. For example, order date, I drag and drop that to the dimension, and I would say wrap that to a year, for example, and we say this one is YY. Oops. And display name is also YY. And we take it again and we say, for example, the month, and this one here is now taken to the month or quarter or whatever. And we say the total amount is, for example, a measure. In that case, when we start that now, if you get a error message, you simply have to run one time HK software, IBExpert, the setcube DLL. This DLL must be run with rec srv 32 or something like that. And you take this file as a parameter. In that case, the DLL is registered. And the interesting thing here is now, for example, that we can have here, for example, a yearly overview in the vertical and the monthly, for example, here horizontally. And so we now have here a overview about the monthly sales, total by rows, total by columns, and so on, total amount over the years, and a lot of possibilities. And also IBExpert allows you to do that, to export that as HTML file, WMF file, or whatever. And if you want to have that, it's also possible when you are going to the website that you can create, for example, IBExpert.usr file. An IBExpert.usr file should be explained here. And the IBExpert.usr file, I think it's somewhere at the end. Yeah, here. Allows you, for example, also to disable functionalities inside IBExpert, because I think a typical manager is not capable to work with IBExpert on a production database. So let's try to make IBExpert work in manager mode. Let's go back here and disconnect from that. I will store that file, for example, here to the this is not the cube file, but that's not really the problem. I can redo that a little bit later. Let's go back here. Let's start the SQL editor and run the script. And now we are changing, when we run that script, we are changing IBExpert to manager mode. So now we have only the functionalities available for managers. So a very basic functionality. So he can, for example, only open a data analysis, and he can, for example, open an existing cube file. And these cube files can be recreated also automatically based on the cube definition, because the cube definition is now here also defined. The cube files can be exported using IBScript files, imported again, exported to Excel, and a lot of possibilities. So it's also possible to do that with IBExpert. I think we have approximately 10 minutes left. If you want to have some questions or want to ask, for example, additional stuff, you're welcome. We can also do some discussions on the chat. If you have questions, just write them in the chat and I try to answer them. And on the other hand, it's also no problem if we, for example, get some emails from you, for example, for technical details or support that we want to, that you want to have from us. Also tomorrow, you can send us anytime a message based on what you have seen here. You can also get your own personal remote access training based on the hotline support rates. So it's also no problem to have that around the world. It was a little bit of a problem with the customer from Christian from Australia to find a proper time for that, because Australia and Germany are a little bit in different directions, and anytime when somebody wakes up, the other one goes to bed, more or less. But we also find possibilities for that. Do you have plans for support direct import export, for example, to SQL Server? Good point. Not directly. We are currently working on a project for a customer, which is really funny. because we are working with that project using an ODBC driver directly connected to a Microsoft SQL server. It's a little bit harder to display here at the moment. The general application simply runs on a Firebird server, but the data, everything that is written here in Firebird is directly at the moment replicated to a Microsoft SQL server. So you can still work with that application on the Firebird server, but everything else that is needed, for example, for the data warehouse and reporting, global company reporting, is also as data inside their Microsoft SQL server. And it's for the software manufacturer, it's much easier to do it in that way rather than having it only converted his existing applications to run natively on SQL Server. It is often much easier than you think to do so. So if you, for example, see a table here like a customer table, and the customer table, for example, has done some changes here, we simply do some trigger on that database. We document in that trigger that this specific primary key here for this table was now changed, and we simply create, based on a IBEBlock script, a set of commands to do the same operations from the Firebird database back to the SQL server. And if you want that, also vice versa. The good thing is that we do not really work inside the SQL server. But on the other hand, for example, also when you, for example, want to import data, one-time import using the ODBC viewer, it's also no problem to do so. It also runs with bigger amounts of data. But if it's a regular thing that you want to synchronize data from SQL Server and Firebird or from any other source, it's sometimes interesting to do so. The funny thing with the ODBC connection that we have used here is that we had a customer a few years ago. It was really funny to what he was reporting for us. He used the IBEBlock scripting for connecting using an ODBC driver to his IBM iSeries AS400. Some of you might know these black systems from IBM, very expensive but very powerful. And he connected, on the other hand, to a ODBC connection on his MySQL server, on his web server, and he synchronized the data using IBEBlock, which is dedicated more or less to be used with Firebird, without any Firebird server at all. So he simply made a synchronization script between the AS400 and the MySQL server without any Firebird between. That was really one of the funniest ways what we have ever seen, how you can ignore Firebird while using IBExpert. Most of the customers that we are using is on one of the sites always working on Firebird, but that's one of the possible ways also to do that. A lot of web server connections are initiated by such scripts, for example, uploading or downloading orders, uploading product information, and so on. When you have a back office system and you do not want to work with the back office system directly in a web server connected environment where you might be a little bit afraid of having intruders working in your database and getting to data that you do not want to have there. It's much more often easier to have, for example, only the basic customer data that is needed for login and password authentication, rather than directly working on the fully functional database with everything that is, inside your database. So you will not lose so much data if you get an interruption from bad guys. You're welcome, Al. So, any more questions? As I said, we try to make these sessions also in the next weeks, months, years, whatever. We will try to do that a little bit more in depth with some topics. I think we will also start in the future a little bit more to talk about the real world of programming, how we do software development, and not only the database development, but also some of the basic ideas. We think really it's a nice way when we get in contact with you on that way. You're welcome to attend all the sessions, download the videos also. You can also have a look at the old videos, and yeah, let's go for a beer. Okay, restaurants are not opened until now in Germany, but next week we can go for a real beer. And so now we have to go to the fridge and take a beer. Bye-bye and see you. Stay healthy, and hopefully we will have that stupid virus stuff ended as soon as possible. Bye-bye.